Wow, we had 2 fantasy dates and 1 disaster date. I'll cover it as we're on the 10th episode of Clayton's journey to find love. Make sure to subscribe to my channel, don't miss a single session. And I just want to say, this journey is far from over. Welcome back. I must admit, I was stressed out by this episode, not only watching it, but trying to figure out what to say. Because I want to get it right. And I have not seen people more polarized about a topic since the Katie and Greg episode. That's how people are feeling. They're Team Susie or Team Clayton. And I want to come at you from Team Love. As usual, I want to look for the nuggets. And how can we go just a little bit deeper, and what can we learn from this episode about healthy relationships? Now, why are people so polarized? That's the question, right? Because it's going to be dependent upon your own experience, your own lived experience, the own lens that you see relationships through. But in this video, I want to do my best to present what I see in a more neutral way. I know I have my own biases, but I'm trying to calm those down. Bear in mind that I want to give homage. It's hard to be the lead. Yes, we have to give grace to Clayton because we hold him up to a higher standard. And imagine the stress that he's under. I completely understand. This is why I use attachment theory, right? Because it's only when you're in hot water that we see someone's true attachment style. But keep in mind the conversation that we're going to dissect. I get it. It was a 15-minute segment of a 3-hour-long, highly edited section. And I'm not here to diagnose or cast blame, but rather to expand your observations for what people should be looking at in their own relationships. Because what side you identify may be something about your own perspective, right? I know women that have come from a toxic relationship, they're going to relate to Susie and see their ex in this dynamic and call it toxic. Other people are going to call Susie the person who's gaslighting Clayton. But let's try to hold judgment about that, right? And then there's Clayton's own lived experiences. And now, of course, he's on the podcast and we're listening to him. And I only hope that we get to hear Susie too. But Clayton admitted, even prior to this, that he's made mistakes. And good for him that he's taking responsibility. He himself said if he could have done fantasy suites over, he admit he overreacted and he should have calmed down. But the show wants the drama, right? Because it makes for good TV. And it's the first time ever that the ending's not spoiled because it hasn't finished yet. This is also why, again, as I mentioned, I use attachment theory and I want to get to that in a little bit deeper. Now, bear with me as I give some neutral reaction to both sides. And then let's talk about an acronym I have for you called SECURE that you can learn how to be more secure in your own relationships. First, I want to give a shout out and start with Rachel and Gabby because I feel like they got robbed, right? They have their own love story going on. We had 2 great fantasy dates. Rachel in the cave with Clayton. How fun was that? She's sweet and loving. Her voice is finally better. They have a great evening. He tells her he loves her. The next morning on the balcony, I love you. What a sweet moment, right? And then there's Gabby talking about spelunking that she didn't get right. It was so cute. But Gabby is just pure joy, right? Her on the dune buggy date with Clayton. You see them both just having so much playfulness. It is so cute to watch. And then you see the excitement in Gabby's eyes when Clayton tells her that he loves her. And the next morning he says the same thing. Now, before I talk about Susie and Clayton, let's put other things into bigger perspective because I'm looking at it in the entire season, not just this one little snippet. You know that I've said that Clayton has an anxious attachment style. Let me describe a little bit more in case you're new to my channel. I don't talk about an attachment style as being any big deal. As a psychologist, it is not a diagnosis. It's merely an explanation of some patterns that show up in your relationships for which you get this from your childhood. Now, what does that mean to have an anxious attachment style? Well, that means that you fall in love easily. You wear your heart on your sleeve. You hate inconsistencies. Your biggest fear is abandonment or rejection. And you need to feel heard, seen, and understood by your partner. Okay, so what I'm having a hard time understanding though, and we just need to talk about the setup here. So Clayton has an anxious attachment style, and I also think he's what I call a low expressive type, meaning he's not good at conflict, right? And we saw this consistently throughout the season, right? We saw him have difficulty confronting the women. We saw him having difficulty talking to Shanae and Elizabeth, trying to figure out what's going on there. Then it was Shanae and Genevieve. And there's a little bit of a naivete, right? Like, I thought the problem was solved. What do you mean? And Clayton didn't grow up with sisters, has some difficulty talking about that, but so do a lot of other people. The problem that I have is now after hometowns, if you remember the last episode, and I talked about this in my last video, Clayton says, I'm not holding back anymore. This is really key, because I think there's something really more to the story here, right? Who told Clayton to actually hold back? I don't know why he's held back. Well, maybe because he's a low expressive person that he's held back. But most of the leads actually follow their heart, right? And now all of a sudden, Clayton is going to tell everyone how he feels about them. And for me, I use this as an experience where somebody might be more passive, more quiet. Now, all of a sudden, they're practicing new skills and it comes across a little bit aggressive because it's kind of intense, right? And I think Clayton, this started happening on hometowns where all the women are being vulnerable with him. And he says, I have to offer you something in exchange. Because if you don't, I'm afraid you're going to leave. Now, we haven't heard this before. Where does he get this from? So for me, what I start to think is, has Clayton himself not opened up in a relationship and then that ended poorly? Okay. Think about your own relationship experience, how now you're in a current situation, you think, oops, can't let that happen again. But I mean it in such a way that it's not a bad thing to have an anxious attachment style. In fact, 46% of women, the most women of all, identify as having an anxious attachment style. I call people lovingly nervous Nora and Nick. Why? Because it's your nervous system that is hypersensitive. Again, connecting quickly, overthinking, people pleasing, all of those traits bundled together. 46% of women, 39% of men fall into this category, and oftentimes many of them go on the show. That's why I bring it up again and again. But of course, they're eager to find love, and that's who Clayton is, and that's why he goes all in. Not a bad thing, unless, of course, you can manage the negative part, which is the intense emotionality. But who else is Clayton? We see that he gets stuck in situations because communication is the difficulties. And he's done, again, other things like cancel rose ceremonies because I think he just gets so flooded and overwhelmed. Okay, and Clayton himself admits that it feels good. Who wouldn't like that feeling when you tell women that you love them, right? It's a great feeling telling Rachel and Gabby, who are eager-eyed looking for him. But here's the thing. This is where we get into the slippery slope. And Clayton admits it himself, that unless all the women have agreed to having a polyamorous relationship, how is this going to work? Right? I can't wrap my head around it, because Clayton admits that it was late in the journey that he realized, oh my gosh, I'm going to hurt somebody. I have to send them home. And that gave him great angst. But how has Clayton been managing all of this? He's been compartmentalizing each of his relationships. And so when he's there, he's fully in it. When he says, I love you, Rachel, I love you, Gabby, he truly does, right? Because he is all in. But the problem, it lacks the knowledge of the future, right? And it lacks some pieces about a secure functioning relationship to be able to protect your partner, to make them feel special. The only conclusion that I have is that Clayton's going to have to move to Utah and have 3 wives. And I just don't think the women are going to go for that. So here's the setup for the date with Susie. By the evening portion of the date, Clayton now tells her he's in love with her too. Now, you can say, okay, we've seen this before, but hold into perspective that they're all different women. And Susie's truly surprised, right? I get the sense that Susie's already rehearsed her exit script because she's been so anxious the whole time. Now let's talk about Susie and where she's coming from. Remember, when we met her in Hometowns, very mild-mannered parents. I think Susie's a secure person, but also she's low expressive herself too. I think Susie would rather avoid having these kinds of conversations. Therefore, we'll get to it, why she didn't express what she needed and wanted sooner too. Remember, also her mother cautioned her, be careful of Clayton, he's not quite there yet, right? So how does Susie know that she's the top choice? She has no indication. And how does she know that Clayton isn't just going to sleep with her and then dump her, right? And her family's going to have to watch that back. So this is where we see Susie's fumbling, right? She's not comfortable. She tells Clayton, if you've expressed your love or slept with anyone else, I don't think I can continue. Wow, that is a bomb. And you can't blame Clayton. This is where he has a nervous meltdown. Who wouldn't, right? Because I don't remember the last time this happened. And it's not only just his biggest fear, it's the biggest fear of all the leads that you get to this point that you choose someone who doesn't choose you back. Greg and Katie, similar thing happened, and I'm not even sure that Greg was Katie's top choice. So obviously the news is devastating, and Clayton is allowed to feel the way that he feels. He feels trapped because it's already done. He can't go back. He can't change it. So if you identify with Clayton, maybe you've been trapped before too. You can identify that there's nothing he can do. Nothing he does is good enough. It is a lose-lose situation. Okay. But it is his reaction at this point that as a couples therapist, I take issue with, and I call it something that you might need to know called anxious angry. I'm not calling Clayton a narcissist or other names. I'm merely suggesting that when the anxious person gets denied something or there's inconsistencies and they fear abandonment or rejection, that they have a meltdown or a temper tantrum. If you want to understand more about this dysregulation, what this looks like, go to my video called The Strange Situation, because there's a laboratory setting that we actually measure this. So that's what's happened. Clayton's been triggered, right? And his protective mechanisms kick in. His abandonment wound is right there, and he's going to shut down to protect himself. You actually can't blame him. All right, but let's slow it down even further. I'm talking a lot about Clayton, but let's talk about Susie too. She's an equal part here, right? Susie's been upset all week. Again, Clayton's been hard to read. She doesn't know where she is. We haven't heard many conversations that are moving the relationship forward, right? And of course, one could say that Susie should have told him. Why didn't she? Because again, I think she's a low expressive person and it would have been difficult. So now Susie's thinking, please tell me that you haven't slept with the other women, even though of course she has a fear, right? She's been watching, and Gabby coming home and Rachel coming home. She has to know, right? But then he says, and I love them too. And Susie's thinking that, okay, and I get that. She's got her own guilt because she is thinking, did I give mixed messages, right? I told him to explore other relationships, but I don't think she really thought that through, right? And we'll hear Susie's perspective, because here's the problem, right? It was an unexplained test.
I believe everything he's saying, and I feel it, and I don't know, maybe it is asking too much, but at the same time I'm not willing to accept it, and I know that's the truth.
And unfortunately, Clayton didn't pass the test. I'm not suggesting this is good by any means. You shouldn't test your partner, right? But I'm not so sure if it was about the sex or about the love. They do talk a lot about the sex, so one might think and go down that path, isn't Clayton allowed to explore his options? He's been so excited about that. How dare she take that from him? But the test was this, again, the unconscious test. If you loved me, Clayton, you would know. If you loved me, I wouldn't have to tell you, don't sleep with the other women. And then if you passed the test, I know it's not a good one. If you pass the test and come and tell me that I'm your only person, then I'm going to be able to relax and I'm going to be able to know that it's me. Because remember, again, there are receipts on the show. And this is one of my big objections about the show in general and why I don't think the outcomes are great, because you have to go back. There's the living it in real time, and then there's the going back and watching it. And how painful that has to be to even watch them making out with as many people, but then to hear the stories and to see the connections and hear the clips. Oh, I think I could marry them. There's so much explaining that has to be done. I can only imagine the amount of repair work that needs to be done. So again, here's where people are going to diverge in their thinking. So some people are going to see Clayton as yelling, raising his voice, which is traumatizing to them. That's going to trigger something. Other people are going to see like no big deal. He barely raised his voice at all. It was Susie who was in the wrong. Okay, so I need to put into perspective for people to also consider how a young woman feels. All right, so here's Susie, 26 years old, 5'6", mild-mannered family. I talked about that. Here Clayton is, big guy, 6'5". I think Susie's scared. Okay, I really do. Because here's this big guy who's raising her voice. She's in Iceland. She's alone. Everyone talks about how sort of alone in those moments they actually are. And she also mentioned that she had had some negative experiences in relationship. But how do I know that she's scared? Because she's acting in what we call a fawn response. So in autonomic arousal, there's 4 different ways: fight, flight, freeze, and fawning. Okay? All of them make sense. Fawning is when I fawn over you. I'm trying to appease you. People were saying, well, why doesn't Susie just get up and leave? If she's so convicted, maybe she wants to be the bachelorette, she should just leave. But why is she hovering, right? Why does she keep staying there? And that's because it's very hard to do when people get into fawning and even freeze mode. This is why later, right? It's like, well, why didn't I react? Why didn't I say something? Because we all replay that later. All the would have, should have, could haves that come later. But it's a normal reaction. And this is why we see Susie apologizing.
I'm like, I know that you like don't want to hear anything at this point, and like I can tell by like I listen to you that you probably hate me at this point, and like I'm genuinely so sorry.
Now, the problem is, from Clayton's perspective, his biggest fears are getting acted out, right? That he's being left. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Okay. Again, it's a lose-lose situation, and he can't even keep track of it. So, but Susie, all right, I'm just going to throw this out. In her mind, I'm imagining how much is happening quickly too. But wait a minute. You said you loved me in Croatia. And if you knew then, why did you need to test that by being with other women? Because if you knew, wasn't that enough? And I don't know how you feel, but this is the divide. Maybe some people are okay with that. Maybe some people are like, go sow your oats, test it out with everyone else, and then choose me and I'll feel great. But other people don't have that perspective, right? I'm not condoning one thing or the other. I'm just merely trying to say, what is the perspective? Okay. So it makes some sense, of course, that people are arguing about this. Is it about the sex? Is it about the love? What is it? But we have to pull this back to the two people. And in both their minds, they feel like they're setting a boundary. And both of the couple actually feels like the other one has quit on them, right? Clayton says that you have invalidated everything.
I don't even know who I'm looking at anymore.
Susie is feeling like he already failed the test, because if he really loved her, he wouldn't even be putting her in that situation. And this is where I also think this couple in particular, both being low expressive people, is not a good fit. Because you need one person who's going to be the anchor, but one person who's going to be able to communicate during difficult times. So let me talk about another dialogue that's happening. So we hear from Clayton on some of the podcasts that he had dangerous thoughts. What does that mean? Dangerous in my mind means suicidal, but Clayton means dangerous thoughts, that he started going down the rabbit hole thinking that Susie wants to be the bachelorette, right? So now how does he feel? that is a part of his emotional reaction too. He's allowed to have that, right? The emotional reaction is, oh my God, I am being duped. She's discarding me. And that's where we see more emotionality. So now the question is, right? He says, you just dropped a bombshell on me. I don't agree with all of this. I think it's BS and I'm done. So who's really quit? Well, they both are quitting, right? But people are responding, and I personally think that I just can't put this out as good behavior in a couple. There would have been 100 different ways we could dissect this, 100 different ways this could have gone better. There could have been more compassion. There could have been more holding space. Clearly, the couple needed to become regulated so that they could really talk to one another. But they're both having their own emotional experiences. And again, production is fueling all of this, that it just doesn't look good. So, again, Clayton rightfully says there's nothing more that I can say. He finally walks Susie out. And then people are even saying, well, how much was Susie really into it because she wasn't crying in the limo? I don't know. My thought is she's still in shock and that this is really difficult. Ideally, this couple just would have taken a time out, talked about it the next day. I think we would have very different endings. That's what we can learn. That's what you can take away from this, that sometimes you have these fights and you break up and you don't actually really mean to. They're sort of like unintentional breakups, if you know what I mean. So, what can I say? There have been a lot of questions out there. Now I want to get to your questions. There have been questions about, is this gaslighting? All right, look up the definition. Clayton himself looked it up and he said, nope, that's not me. That's not what he's done. He hasn't tried to make Susie feel like she's crazy. He didn't flip on her. He has good intentions. Now there's the difference between intent versus impact. This is something else you should write down. In couples, it's like, well, I'm well intended, but my impact is I hurt you. We have to take ownership for that. Even though I'm well intended, I may not be super conscious of how I'm coming across. And I think here it's it's Clayton's tone, it's his demeanor. It's all of that that makes it more important for him to rein that in. Okay, now I might say that the definition of gaslighting, I don't think completely applies here. I would have to hear from Susie how she felt about that. So that's why I'm reserving judgment. But it does seem a little bit like blame shifting for me because, and both of them, but primarily it looked like Clayton was trying to put some blame on Susie. And that was a big bone of contention that people were having.
I'm not trying to place any extra blame on you, but...
Okay. But finally, we will get more to the end of this story. So now I want to land this plane and talk about what is it that we can learn from all of this. And this is where I want to give you an acronym of the word secure. Okay, so keep this word secure in mind because that is ultimately the goal. The only way for a long-term successful relationship to work S, to have safety. Yeah, if you don't feel safe in your relationship, you've got nothing else. E, emotional availability. You have to be available to your partner to talk through things. Remember, defensiveness doesn't work. C, curiosity. Ask questions. Figure out. Don't make assumptions. U, understanding. You have to be understanding of your partner's perspective to have some empathy. R, relaxation. That's what this couple missing. They weren't relaxed and therefore nothing good comes out of that. And E, expressiveness. Here's the point about being a low expressive person. It feels bad when you speak up because nobody has asked you how you felt. My advice to you, be bad sooner. It only feels bad, but you cannot expect people to read your mind. And I tell that to both of them. So, of course, landed the plane, the summary, the show is flawed. We know that. We've known that for years. It's conducive for drama, not long-term relationship. And of course, being the bachelor is a very difficult position. But we need good men. We need good role models. We need to put forward behavior that says this is something that we can look for. Now, what happens if you're an anxious person? Well, I've got some things for you. Check out my website, Back to Love Doc. I've got a Back to Love school. I've got courses for people on how to better manage their anxious anxiety. There's a lot about polyvagal theory too. But I want to say we have not landed this plane yet totally about what's going to happen between Susie and Clayton and the two other women too. Stay tuned. We'll go over all of that because my feeling is hopefully this will all come together.